1, live.
Hello everyone, how are you? I'm Lawrence Mitchell, and we're almost halfway through our Shire Wellbeing Festival. We've had a day and a half of amazing content that has been designed to educate, inspire and provide access to different solutions. And today in our second summit, this is our Energy Summit, and I'm delighted to be here with the CEO and Chief Energizer of human performance company Energx, Sean Hall. Hey Sean, how are you? It's good to see you. Thank you so much for making time to join us today.
Wonderful.
Maybe if we start by cool. Maybe if we start because I know you've got some really cool things to help everybody find something which is so important to life, more energy.
This meeting is being recorded.
And having that title, Chief Energizer, I'd love to know how you came to be Chief Energizer. I mean, it's not something clearly you wake up when you're a young person and say, I want to be Chief Energizer. How did you come to be doing the work that you do today?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of things, it started with perhaps being the opposite of that and not having hardly any energy. I think that a lot of people can relate to the topic of burnout. We've seen it recognized last year by the World Health Organization, as a workplace phenomenon. For me, my experience of that goes back to having a big corporate jobs. At one point in my career, I was responsible for a $9 billion brand, a telco brand, and I was leading that brand at the time through a big transformation that was impacting 16 million customers, about 80,000 employees and partners. And it was a really unique moment in my career because as a marketer, I think it's very unusual to be able to have an opportunity to have that scale of change and influence, to literally work for a brand that touches the lives of basically every Australian. And so I really threw everything into that role. That meant that I'd do some crazy hours. Sort of joke, I'd be at work till 2 a.m. sometimes. I'd leave it and then I'd be back at 6, just to try and cope with the workload. And I take a bit of responsibility for this as well, because I know that I was a yes guy, I was a perfectionist, and I didn't really know how to ask for help. But there was a moment in this transformation program where one day I found myself in the fancy men's accessories department of David Jones. And that was a bit unusual for me for a couple of reasons. The one is, I'll say I don't buy like $1,000 man bags or $250 pocket squares. I don't even like to wear sleeves most of the time. And then the other reason it was unusual that day is that I actually had no idea how I got there. And if another customer had seen me, they would have thought I looked a bit dazed and confused. But I know that I was just feeling all sorts of really crazy on the inside. My body was shaking, my mind was racing. And what snapped me out of it that day is I got a phone call from a friend, and I still don't remember really what we talked about. All I just remember is that feeling. And that was really the tipping point for me to go, I have to look after myself better. And the irony in all of that too was that I actually knew a lot about the physical parts of well-being because I'd spent 16 years in the fitness industry prior to this. And what I realized is there were a whole bunch of decisions that I was making that I wasn't even aware of. I was just on autopilot. And so my journey into getting well again was really trying to look back and go, what were the warning signs I'd missed? Because you don't just wake up one day and find yourself wandering around a department store not knowing how you got there. Had to
you
be
literally had
signs.
Wow, and you found yourself in David Jones, no idea of getting there, and then someone called you, and that brought you back into the moment. Wow, so that was the moment
Totally.
when you decided to change.
Yeah, and it was just a process of small changes, and so is essentially what's led me to do what I do today, is help people identify those warning signs, and then ultimately build new skills and new practices to prevent those getting any worse or to overcome them. And so there's actually 11 warning signs that we now look for, and we're able to identify those through an assessment that we use with people. and then based on those findings, help them, with the right skills. Because often we're just not putting ourselves first into the basics, things like moving and sleeping, things like being able to deal with your inner critic, being passionate about what you do, being clear, about where you focus. Like we're going to talk about diary management later, and that, just even that, knowing where the decisions that you're making about how you actually create space, how you focus your time is really, really important.
So I love what you're saying, because it gives people a lot more of the control, a lot more of the power, particularly now when there's so much that's out of our control. I mean, it's always the case, but particularly now, just being able to give people the tools to be able to take back some of that control and support them and optimize their own energy. One of the terms that I've heard you use before is the X factor and the EX factor. I may have got that wrong, but I'd love, I think I know what you mean by that, but I'd love for you to elaborate and expand on that term.
Yeah, well, the X factor really comes from thinking about, I guess, a question that says, why would someone hire you? Why would they promote you? Why would they give you new opportunities? And it really comes back to taking responsibility in charge of your career, right? So what are the skills that you need in order to have that X factor, right? To be someone that people look to, that they know you're going to be a safe pair of hands. And they really come back to really life skills, right? And the way in which we handle ourselves. And at its simplest, it's really about two things. Firstly, it's about creativity. So if you think about it, no one ever got hired for a job or given an opportunity, right, if they said, I'm just going to do things exactly the way they've always been done, right? We want new ways of working, new thinking, new products and services, innovation, all of those sorts of things. We all need to be creative. And I sort of feel like if we look at the world today, the world needs creativity more than it's ever needed it. And then the second part that goes alongside that is capacity. Like, do I have enough gas in the tank, essentially to excel, sustain myself in times of change? And when, we're going through a massive amount of change even before COVID. And so our ability to deal with that and navigate that change is really important. Within those two things, and this is what I say, like if you X factor talent, so if you want to be seen as X factor talent, you'll have high creativity and high capacity. And then the skills that we need to build in order to have those two things, from a capacity side, the first thing is about knowing how to light up your brain. Right, so this comes back to our mental well-being, and you think about most of us are doing what they call knowledge or interaction worker type jobs. So the most important part of our body for those types of jobs is our brains, and that's essentially what an employer is buying these days. They're buying your brains; they're not buying your biceps, right? As much as we might
increasingly so,
yeah, And so we have to take responsibility for understanding how to light up our brains. And so the other aspects of well-being become in service to that. So I look after myself physically. I sleep, I move, I hydrate, I nourish myself well, because I know that those things light up my brain. So it becomes a different reason to invest in ourselves. But ultimately, this all comes back to responsibility. I'm responsible for knowing how to light up my brain and look after myself. The second part to capacity is really around productivity, personal productivity. So do I know how to identify the highest priority, highest value work, and then autonomously sort of deliver that? So deliver what I say I would deliver. And so, and this is really important in terms of 97% of the jobs, according to Deloitte, of the future of work jobs require people to have excellent time management skills, because we have to self-manage. But when you think about it, most of us are really bad at managing our diaries. And we're just sort of on default most of the time on autopilot, just saying yes to everything, not really thinking consciously about that. Then on the creativity side, there's two skills as well. And so the first is what I call creative muscle. So, and this is really based on the neuroscience of creativity and positive psychology. So what are the behaviors, the skills that I need to be more creative? And as adults, I think we often think that we're not creative. But what we've seen from research, there was a really interesting study done by a NASA scientist that assessed the creativity of children. So at 5 years old, where 95% of us are tested or assessed at genius level for creativity. But by the time that we get to adults, it gets down to just 2%.
Really,
Because we
that's
sort
so
of,
interesting.
yeah,
We lose it.
we lose it. We actually, so we learn how not to be creative, which is such an interesting thing. So we've got to get that back. And so creative skills are things like curiosity, being brave, seeking perspectives, being enthusiastic, because we know that mood is really, really important for creativity. And then the final one is around critical thinking or judgment. So how do I take all of those data points essentially, and then interpret those into an insight or solving a problem, or having a strong point of view around something. And so we can all practice those things, right? And it's really, you know, when you break it down and make it that simple, we can all be creative if we use those creative behaviors. And then linked to creativity as well, and a whole bunch of research around this is really about being inclusive. And so one of my favorite quotes is from Tim Cook, who's the CEO of Apple. And he says that inclusion inspires innovation. And the reason that it does that is because when you are looking and inspired by people that act, think, look different to you, right, you get a different perspective on a problem, and that will spark creativity. And so here, often when we're talking about inclusion, often people are focusing on bias identification. And what we're trying to do is reframe that into the positive and go, I want to be inspired by people that think, act, look different to me, you know, and I actively go out there, I'm inspired by those differences, and I value those differences, and I bring them back. And so ultimately the X factor comes down to 4 things. It's like, I know how to light up my brain. I know how to get the highest value work done. I know how to have bold, brave ideas and communicate those well. And then finally, that I'm inclusive. And so I believe we've all got an X factor, right? We just perhaps need a little bit of help finding it.
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, what's exciting, I guess, about what you say, or maybe liberating, is because I think a lot of people think that you're born with what you've got, and you can't actually learn these skills. But when you break it down in the way you've just described, you realize that you can teach. You can teach yourself wherever you are at whatever point in your life. But you can also teach your children. We've had a comment through around how can children continue to be creative, I guess, in the framework of schools, because I guess what the point that's been made is that some of our environments, I guess, as a world, we've become very left brain focused. You know, the importance, and I know data and analytics is really, really important, but it can go too far one way, and the more right brain creative skills have been prioritized less in our society. And I guess by being able to take back that control and readdress that balance, you realize that you can actually develop the creative skills using the methodology that you've just described, and that's called the X factor. I love that.
Yeah, totally. And I think one of the things that you're sort of touching on there too is what the neuroscience shows us is that there are 2 ways in which the brain lights up depending on the part of the creative process that we're in. So in a creative process, you have the divergent thinking, you know, where you're going wide, looking for like connections between things, insights, all of that sort of stuff. And then you have the converging, which is where it's actually the hard work often of producing those ideas, bringing them to life, bringing them to reality. And the brain lights up quite differently for both. So for our divergent, the network's called our default mode network. And it's really requires us to be at rest, to be not stressed, you know, there's a huge link to our well-being around this. And so anxiety is actually quite crushing for that, because we can't be present essentially to things that are going on. And so what we know from the neuroscience research is that the default mode network, or the DMN, is actually quite underdeveloped in a lot of us. Whereas the other network, which is called the executive attention network, EAN, is where we do the convergent, and that is very task orientated. And so that is what's actually highly developed in most of us, because we're focused that way. So, and that's why when you think about it, you know, when you're trying to be creative, if you like sit down at your desk and go, I'm going to be creative right now, it's basically impossible to be creative. You know, you need to be doing something different from that to actually just relax your brain, essentially, and allow it to go into the default mode network.
Yeah. Really interesting. I want to move on now and start talking about energy because I can see from comments and a lot of people, and please do share any comments, ask any questions, because I know energy is something that a lot of people do struggle with. In my previous role, when I was Chief Customer Officer at Sumo Salad, and we did a lot of research in terms of the audience, and energy was always the number one problem. People wanted more energy wherever they were, and we talked a lot about food and some of the different things in terms of the X factor. But if we ask that question in terms of energy, everyone's at a different starting point. What would you say to the question, how can somebody get more energy? What would they do? Where would they start?
Yeah, so it's a great point, right? And where this all started for me in the focus on energy was actually when I was going through that burnout at quite a low point. I had a conversation with a man that I call a frientor. He's a great guy called Kamal Sama.
I love that.
And Kamal used to be a monk, and then he went on to be a venture capitalist and McKinsey consultant, as monks do. I sort of joke. And
really?
But these days he's the chairman of the Are You OK Day think tank. And he was the first person to say to me, Sean, have you thought about managing your energy and not your time? And that idea just really exploded in my head because I thought it's so simple. Because I can ask you after any experience that you have, whether it's doing something like this or spending time with friends or cooking a meal or getting outside or just sitting quietly alone with your thoughts. And I can say, did that experience energize you or deplete you? And you'll just know, right? You might not necessarily know why. And this is a big part of it, is we're turning that natural intuition, what our heart and our gut says about how we're feeling from an experience. And then we turn that into intelligence using the assessments. So people are able to work out, okay, here's where my current energy is. Here's where I believe I'd like it to be. Now, how do I get from A to B? And that's basically the job that we do at Energx, is we help individuals, teams, whole organizations get from their current capacity, which is usually diminished, to their potential capacity in very simple, practical ways. And so I think that's one of the big things straight away. And what we know is we've now assessed almost 6,000 professionals. And what we see is that we ask this one question, which sort of sums everything up. We just say, how many of the last 10 days did you feel that you had enough energy for what's important to you, for what really matters? And women on average only say 4.7 out of 10 days, so 47% of the time. And guys say just a little bit higher, about 5.1, so 51% of the time. And when you think about it, just even feeling that way comes with a lot of heavy, depleting emotions too sometimes. If you don't feel like you've got enough energy for what's important to you, if that's relationships, you might feel, ashamed or guilty, around those sorts of things. They're not very nice feelings to be having. If you think about your ability to deliver, say, work that you're proud of, if you've only got 40%, if your battery's only 47% charged,
you're running at half capacity. Yeah,
you're never quite able to deliver what you're truly capable of, right? And so this is where I think the idea of capacity is really interesting, because often we talk about not having enough capacity. It's used in the negative. And what I'm saying to my clients is, if someone says that, what they're actually saying is they're saying, I have diminished capacity right now. That's not their true capacity. We can get them to their true potential. It's just about knowing where you're at today versus where you want to be, and then doing the right, simple, practical steps around self-care, essentially, to actually get to your goals.
Okay. So maybe if we expand on that in terms of the how, because everyone always wants to jump in and say, well, how do you do it? So this concept, I want to come back to this concept around energy intelligence. So you have a tool, and you can assess, and we can understand exactly where we are from an energy capacity at any point of time. That's what you're saying, and this is the tool that you use. So that sounds really cool, and we'll come back to that, because I'm sure everybody would love to understand where they are from an energy capacity point of view. But when you get into the when you get into the how and the starting point, do you follow certain things, like you look at the food and the sleep and some of those things? What would be, if people can only change one thing at a time, what would you recommend the starting point would be?
Yeah, so when we talk about this, so people, if you're talking about being more well or having more energy, often the starting place that people by default go to is usually around nutrition and exercise. However, we need to come back one step further. And so where I start people is around sleep and hydration, right? So when you think about it, every single cell in our body is going to respond positively to more sleep and getting the recommended 8 hours. And we've never really been taught how to sleep well, right? And so one of the key things I look at there with people is understanding their chronotype, which is the scientific definition for whether you're a morning or night person. And that's your unique physiological starting point, right? So if you're a night person, going to bed at the same time every night is actually the number one thing that you can do from a sleep science perspective that
Right.
shows that will have the biggest impact. And then the other thing is that every single cell in our body contains water. You know, we're 70% water overall. Our brains are actually 80 to 85% water, which explains why even just a small amount of dehydration impacts how we think and feel. And so this is where it becomes very simple for people to get started. It's like, if I can just focus on understanding my chronotype, going to bed at the same time every night, making sure that hour before I go to bed is relaxed without any screens, because that's going to impact the quality of sleep, that my bedroom's set up as a sanctuary. I sort of say to people, your bedroom's only for two things. Um, and so, you know, I'm sure people can guess what they are. And so nothing should be in your bedroom that doesn't contribute to the quantity, quality, and frequency of those two things. You know, so
Right.
starting there, and then starting by having enough water. If you just start there, that's going to have a dramatic increase in your energy just from those two things. But often we'll go
Okay.
to food or exercise.
Okay, so literally turn your room into a sanctuary. So it's this kind
Yep.
of wonderful place, and
Yep.
start drinking more water, and then understanding this point about your chronotype, or knowing whether you're a morning person or an evening person. How would someone know that? Because I know in the course of my own life, 20 years ago, I would not have described myself as a morning person, whereas now I'm up very, very early, and I would describe
Yep.
myself as a morning person. So it's interesting to know what your
Yep.
natural type is, if you like, versus the situation that you're in because of your job or your family or whatever
Totally.
commitments you have.
Totally. So, so actually, what we might share after this is on my website. There's you can do a free version of my energy intelligence assessment. So at energx.com.au. There's also in our blog, there's a great resource around sleep. So looking at giving people really practical ways. So there's a chronotype assessment that you can do on there that'll tell you what time you should go to bed based on
Okay,
your
cool.
unique physiology. And then there's
Right.
also some more content around, I guess, the impact of sleep right down to our DNA. We've got a whole bunch of video content on there as well. And then also just some recommendations around your nighttime routine, and even how you set up your bedroom. So, because I like to sort of say, like, you know, your night determines your day. You know, we spend so much time often focusing on our morning routine, and very little time focusing on our nighttime routine.
Yes, I think that's a really good point. So sleep really important. You can go to your website, and we can find out our natural type and what time we should go
Yeah,
to bed. So if we're going to bed
yeah,
at midnight and we should go to bed at 10 o'clock, then that's going to make a notable difference to our energy. That's what you're saying. And then the
yeah.
water side of things. I mean, it's always a note to self, because I don't drink enough water, so it's always good to remind you. I've got one down here, but I sip away. Just touching on the food and exercise, because I don't want to diminish those things, because
No,
nutrition is something that I'm super passionate about, the role of food as a foundational habit in life. But you're saying once you focus on sleep and water, then focus on food and movement. These two things are clearly energizing in themselves. What would you say to that?
totally. And I think when it comes to nutrition, often we're overcomplicating things for ourselves. So I'll just say to people, focus on something small. So literally, where we start people is just get the recommended serve every day of vegetables. Just start
Okay.
there as a starting point. don't worry about whether you want to be paleo or vegan or whatever other type of diet. Just start there with more vegetables. Once you feel successful with that, and if you're consciously choosing to eat more vegetables, that's going to have a positive flow-on effect to the rest of your diet as well. Because we're often just trying to overcomplicate things. When it comes to movement, what I'll say to people is find a way to move that brings you joy, right? So, and whether that's gardening or pole dancing, or whatever it might be, but whatever it is that brings you joy in doing that, and find that and just stick to it. What we know now is that 30 minutes a day is the recommendation. So just find a way to do that, or it might be incorporating that into other activities. One of the big promises that I make to all my clients is that when I work with them, nothing I teach them is going to require more time. It's really about using or integrating into existing rhythms that they have, these self-care practices, essentially. So consciously deciding, for instance, that one of the meetings that you're going to do each day is a walking meeting. Focus on listening, give your brain and your eyes a break, especially with so many of us doing a lot more virtual online meetings these days. Get outside, get some fresh air, get some vitamin D, you're getting all of these things all at the same time, but just find ways to incorporate it versus thinking that you have to steal time from something else to exercise. If you can incorporate it in some way, then that's going to be much better for you.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, I do that a lot because I'm a big runner, but when I'm running, I'm studying as well because I'm a big reader. And I just haven't got time to do both, so I have to do them at the same time. Also, I think one of the underlying themes that I hear you saying is that we're all individual, and you talk about the natural rhythms, and I guess. And this is the culture and the system that we live in, that there is I guess a tendency to think that there's a right or a wrong, whereas in truth there's a right and a wrong for you as an individual. And clearly there are some things that we can all do that is going to be good for us. Increasing the amount of vegetables, for example, it feels like a quick win, but when I look at the data, it's something like 65% of Australians don't eat the recommended number of fruits and vegetables, and when you drill down even further, then you realize that the actual vegetables that are most popular are things like potatoes and bananas, and so that feels like a big win. And I know one of the benefits, or one of the things coming out of the lockdown, is that more people are cooking and growing their own and doing that type of thing, which is clearly going to really help. So really understanding understanding yourself so that you can create a lifestyle or a self-care program that is going to support you to get more energy. In terms of just picking up, we're getting quite a few comments, but just thinking about things that people can do at the very end of the day, and there's certainly I can do this, and recently with a lot of things going on, I've been working late in the evening, and even though I know that this is not great, still at my computer at 10 o'clock at night, I know this isn't good practice from a self-care point of view. But what would be the recommendation in terms of, you talked about the sanctuary, but in terms of working, and sometimes we're in situations that we feel we don't have a choice, or we've committed and we need to kind of get that through. But in terms of being able to calm down at the end of the day and feel that we are optimizing our energy, we can have a really good night's sleep, and as you say, and then the sleep, what you say in terms of the day you live, the day you lead is determined by the night that you have, and I completely relate to that and completely agree to that. And it's the same when I used to run marathons. They always said that the marathon you run is really the determined on the training that you've done. So it's exactly the same principle, that the night feels like, God, can we sleep for 8 hours? But I know myself, if I have a really good night's sleep, then it has a huge difference to my energy and my cognitive ability, my ability to articulate sentences the next day. But any tips that people can do to calm down at the end of the day, so that ultimately they are conserving their energy and they can have a better day the next day?
Yeah, so I think one of the ways to reframe this is, if you, first of all, knowing your chronotype, right? So say for me, my chronotype says, Sean, go to bed about 11:30 p.m. So then I start to think about, okay, so from 10:30 p.m. to 11:30 p.m., what am I doing that's going to mean that as soon as I walk into my bedroom, it's lights out. I'm relaxed, I'm ready, my brain's switched off, I'm just ready to recover and relax. And so this comes down to creating for yourself, and this is a great way to express your creativity, right? Is to come up with for yourself what I call like a sleep spa routine. So if you go to a spa, right, you'll have an a la carte sort of menu of all the things that you might choose from, because that whole purpose of being there is to rejuvenate, relax, recover, restore. So thinking about it the same way. And then, as you said, not everybody's the same. So try some different experiments, share those with other people, and see what works for you. So things that you might do, for instance, to relax in that hour. So first of all, we say no screens, right? So get off the screens, maybe, have a real in-life conversation, something like that. You could do things like, even if you think about just even the light or the ambient lights in your room, like turn the lights down, create some ambiance, to really just sort of start to create those psychological cues for yourself that you're about to relax, you're about to go to sleep. We know that scents, aromatherapy like lavender helps. We know magnesium can help as well for people if you're taking that before, especially if you're, say, one of those people that gets cramps or is a bit of a twitcher. There could be things like having a warm bath, because what we know, for instance, with a warm bath, the fact that what it does for you is that what we need to do for our bodies to go to sleep and stay asleep is we need to cool down our core body temperature. And so having a warm bath, when you get out of that, that's what's going to happen. You're going to cool down your core body temperature. Also, we know the temperature of your room is actually the second most important variable according to the sleep science. So we want to have our room cool and dark like a cave. So 18 to 20 degrees Celsius is a recommendation there, which feels really cool. But that's why we know it's way easier to sleep in a cool room than it is in a hot room. One of the things that I say to people a lot too is, say if you got a lot going on in your head, one of my favorite things to tell people is to get out of your head, get into your body in some way, and so it could be a meditation, it could be doing some light yoga poses, things like child's pose and light twists and things like that, which just again give your body those physical cues, right? That it's time to relax. And so when you think about it, like you could have like a menu literally of like 20 different things, and you want to just say, well, tonight I'm just going to do that and that and that, and experiment with those until you create for yourself a little routine that really works for you.
That's really cool. So a spa hour every day, every day a spa hour with different things, and you're going to create in that. That's really cool. If we go to the next morning as well, and I also want to just bring on the fact that, because what you're describing, and you talk about screens and devices, and I know that many people will take their phones into their room and they'll check it in the middle of the night and they'll look at it as soon as they open their eyes. And I've consciously, I'm talking to you as a person who's not perfect here, but I've consciously now I don't have any phones in our room, and I try and protect the first hour of the day, so I don't look at the phone. I have my phone for the first hour of the day. I'd love to know your thoughts on morning routines. There's been a lot that's been written about morning habits and the importance of morning habits in terms of energizing you and setting your day up for success. A lot of people say, well, I just don't have the time for all these things, but it doesn't have to take a lot of time, does it? You can do some very small things that can have a really big impact. Yeah,
and one of the things is that I think it's a really good opportunity now to really revisit these things, right? Because with what's been going on with the crisis, all of us have had our routines disrupted in some way, right? And we're out of rhythm, and that feels a bit off, and we just feel out of sorts, So here's an opportunity to go, okay, well, how do I get back into the rhythm? And this is what I love about that from a human perspective, is when you think about it, humans are designed to be in rhythm, whether it's our breath or our heart rate. And when we feel those rhythms are off, we feel odd. So how can we create a rhythm for ourselves that's very mindful? Because I will ask people to write out their morning rhythm, and then I'll say, how long have you been doing that for? And most people have been doing the same morning rhythm for literally years. But when you ask them what they've actually done with that all of that time, they can't tell you, because you're literally on autopilot. You're doing these things mindlessly. And so a very simple morning routine that I recommend to people is you're doing, the great thing, first of all, get your phone out of your bedroom, plug it in somewhere else. If your phone's your alarm clock, go buy an alarm clock, right? As simple as that. I will say to people, protect that at least those first 15 minutes of the day from technology, because as soon as we jump into technology, we instantly go into reactive mode, right? We're not able to control what turns up on that screen. And so if you start your day proactively, start it the way you want it to continue. So protect that first 15 minutes, keep it device free. What I'll say to people is, in that first 15 minutes, get up and make your bed straight away, right? Because it doesn't sound like logical in a way, but actually research shows that if you make your bed in the morning, you're actually more likely to have a good night's sleep at night. But it means you've already progressed, right? You've already achieved something straight away. Then we say about hydration, right? So take some water in. You might start the day in a positive mindset by writing 3 things that you're grateful for. And what we know is that from a positive psychology point of view, gratitude is one of the highest correlated behavior to overall happiness and well-being. If you're going to have a shower, because most of us will have a shower, make 30 seconds of that cold, because we know that a cold shower stimulates your immune response as well. So you're incorporating that into something that you're already doing. I'll say to people again about the mood thing, as you're getting for work, put on your favorite theme song, like a bit of a dance, whatever it might be. But all of these are just little tiny things that you just integrate into your existing routine. They don't take any more time. You're already doing it. Just purposefully do things which are going to support you to start your day in the best possible frame of mind, and just build on that, like hold on to that for the rest of the day.
That's really good. One thing I've noticed, just picking up on the theme also around gratitude, because it's something that is said a lot, and certainly one of the learnings or the lessons that's coming out of this whole lockdown experience is that we are appreciative of the things that we took for granted. Suddenly just going to a cafe, they're open again. It's like, oh, this is amazing. We can go and actually meet people in a cafe, because that wasn't possible just a couple of weeks ago. But building that into your day, and I noticed that one thing I've changed recently is, because I've had so much work and so many different things to do, but just in the morning to-do list, I used to feel a lot of anxiety, I guess, in terms of thinking about all the things that had to be done, and it's like, oh my God, have I got enough time in the day to actually do all of those things? And if you're doing that continuously, then that takes your energy away. And I've reframed my to-do list, and I call it a things to look forward list. And I find and it's really strange. It's really just framing it in that way has actually had a very different perspective, because suddenly I'm aware it's happening. So and it's even the things I'm not looking forward to. So I say my to-do list suddenly gets framed in that way, which really helps to energize me. So it's an interesting point, but gratitude is something that can be very integrated. But I think us humans, being biologically the way we are, we tend to focus on the negative rather than the positive, and therefore we don't often see that positive. And I've certainly experienced that working in different companies where where there's a lot going on, and we'll start the meeting with, what are the things that we're happy about, and people really struggle. It's like, I can't think of anything because I'm just focused on all the things that are not working, and that tends to color our judgment. But you talked about the gratitude journal. Maybe you could expand on that. Is it just 3 things that we should do, and these can be micro things rather than the big things? How would someone integrate a practice of gratitude into their lives so it becomes a habit?
Yeah, so what the research shows is the benefit really comes from writing things down. And I think when you are well practiced at a skill, especially around gratitude, you start to really focus on the little things. So I actually did a piece of research in my marketing career where we actually asked people to keep a diary of all the moments that they felt connected. And it was a massive change for me in terms of the way I focus around strategy, because often we focus on the sort of big cliched moments, but what we know is that our overall sense of well-being is actually about being mindful of those little moments we feel connected. So you could say, family, but actually, a little moment you might be grateful for is just when, your son or daughter just grabs your hand, and looks up at you. Like, it's that little tiny moment is something to be grateful for, that you've captured and put it in there. And this is a practice, as you said, like our brains are hardwired to be like magnets for the negative, and they're like Teflon for the positive. And so we have to practice this stuff to make it stick. And so, but the research, the positive psychology research, had about 1,000 adults just literally write down 3 things they were grateful for every day, just for 1 week, and they were still feeling the positive benefits of that up to 6 months later. And so,
Okay.
I think, like, to your point, like, you could be, as part of your morning routine, you actually, as you said, what am I going to be grateful for today to have achieved? So you're sort of almost manifesting it, putting it out in front. Or it could be part of your end of day reflection. There's no point, there's no need to sort of have a defined time, right? And I think that often, you might even say, as you said, like, you could just have a meeting and you say, actually, I was really grateful for, learning that thing, or meeting that new person, or being able to contribute an idea. So it's really just about that whole concept of being present to, I guess, these opportunities that we create for ourselves, versus thinking, and this is why I sort of think, often people feel like it's a bit heavy, gratitude, I have to practice gratitude. It's like, no, just find those little moments. What was so interesting about that research was that we actually had the participants actually thanked us for being a part of that, because essentially what they ended up with was this big gratitude diary, all these little moments. And what we found too is that the times they felt connected was everything from connected to myself, right? So just having some quiet time for myself, I'm grateful for that. Feeling connected to something bigger, whether that was, say, they went out, for a walk, in nature or something like that, and just being grateful to be, I guess, almost to be insignificant sometimes when you sort of see the scale of that, all the way through to being grateful for the connections, with relationships, all the way out to even just a moment, say with a random stranger, and you both see something funny happen, you just sort of share that little interaction, and all of those little moments actually had a big contribution overall to people's sense of well-being.
That's super interesting. So I love that. It's the tiny things, and doing it for every day for a week, so it becomes a habit. So once again, you can learn these new skills. So showing gratitude is a skill. So it doesn't mean that you're like Pollyanna, because I think some people can think, how can you be like super, how can you be grateful or positive about anything in a world where we've got, so many challenges actually happening. But of course, what I always say is there's always a reason to be unhappy. If you want to, you don't need to try. You just look on the news, and you're going to feel your mood's going to be impacted in a negative way, and your energy will be. But to your point, if you can actually take more control of that and recognize that you actually are in control of where you put your attention, then of course you're also choosing where you're actually putting your energy. And as a segue and building on that, I'd love to bring in this concept, because I know you talk about energy demons and energizers, and I love this term, and you have an energy diary, and I think maybe now's a good point to introduce the energy diary, so that people at home can understand, because it's a very personal thing. So ultimately we can talk in general terms, but ultimately energy optimization is down to each and every one of us really understanding where our energy is going and where the energizers are, and what's actually taking our energy. So maybe if you could expand on the diary, what it is and how people can use it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lawrence, because I think if there's one skill, I guess, that I've learned, or that I teach people, that I feel has the biggest impact overall, it's a tool that I created called an energy diary, right? And so basically it helps people make decisions around where they actually create space for things that energize them, how they manage things that don't. I call them energy vampires, right? So the things, people, tasks, thoughts, essentially, that seem to sort of suck the energy away from us. And so I was lucky enough a few years back to earn a place on a scholarship program called the Marketing Academy. And as part of that, I got all these amazing mentor opportunities. And so I met with CEOs and CMOs throughout that whole year, and I asked them 3 questions. Each one was around strategy, one was around culture, and one was around how they made decisions, how they managed their own energy, where they put their attention. And that ultimately led me to create this tool. And so if people are watching right now, I'd encourage them just to grab a piece of paper and a pen, and I'll show them just how easy this is. So if you've got a piece of paper in front of you right now, just grab a pen essentially, and all I want you to do is to just draw a vertical line down the center of a page, and then a horizontal one halfway up that vertical line, right? So you've basically got 4 quadrants, right? The vertical line at the top, you're going to label energizing. At the top of the vertical line, energizing. At the bottom, you're going to put depleting. All right, so at the bottom, put depleting. And this is why we talk about energy as a spectrum, right? Things can be a little bit energizing or a little bit depleting, or hugely energizing, hugely depleting, depending on the type of experience, right? And as we become more aware of that, we'll know. But it can't be nothing. It's almost like laws of physics here. It has to be something, right? And then if we go to the horizontal axes, on the left-hand side, if you write unimportant, right? So is something unimportant that's in your diary? And on the other side, on the right-hand side, write important. And I focus on importance versus urgency, because when you think about it, it feels like everything's urgent these days, and often our brains have been hijacked with notifications and emails and all these sorts of things that just make us feel like everything's urgent. And so I think it's a really important thing to distinguish the difference between importance and urgency. And so there we've got those 4 labels. So energizing to depleting, unimportant to important. And what's super important, I guess, for me to say, is that when I talk about importance, that's to you, right? Often we feel like we're making decisions because it's about how that is to someone else. But what I want people to focus on is this is about you taking responsibility for the decisions that you're making about what you say yes or no to. So I prepared one a little bit earlier. Here we go. Right?
Thought you might.
Energizing to depleting, unimportant to important, right? Now, based on that, we make decisions. Now, one of the best ways that you can use this to start with is actually to do it reflectively. So you might open up your diary, look back at the last 2 weeks, and literally we're going to plot things here right from the moment we woke up to the moment we went to bed. And importantly, we're going to use how we feel, our gut and our heart, in making that decision, right? Not overthinking it, right? Just saying, how did that feel for me in the moment, right? And so doing that starts to bring our awareness to the decisions that we made, right? So no one made those decisions for you. You said yes or no to those things that were in your diary over the last 2 weeks. Then we start to plot things. And based on where we plot them, we then start to think about the decisions that we would make next time. Right. So if we start with the first box on the bottom left, so if something's unimportant and depleting, so unimportant to me or you and depleting to you, the decision we want to make is we want to lose it. Right. We want to lose it. Right. Because these are things that are adding no value to your life. The way that you lose things from your diary is there's 3 ways we can do this. The first is that we say no. Right. And sometimes that little word is so hard for us to say sometimes, right? We might feel like by saying no, we're letting people down, but ultimately we have to learn to do this. And so I talk about practicing small acts of courage, right? Little no's to start with. And the way that you say no is that you just be honest and polite, right? So you don't have to make up some crazy story, just be honest and polite. A great example of this is that we all get asked to support charities for friends, family, colleagues, that we might not necessarily feel connected to. And I feel like charity and causes are things that are very personal. You would have had a certain life experience that meant that you feel connected to that cause. And we don't have unlimited budgets, right? So a way that you would say no is you would say to that person, these are the charities I support and why. Unfortunately, that's as far as my budget extends. I'm sorry. Right? You actually haven't had to use the word no, but you've also had a very lovely moment of connection, right? You've been honest and polite. And so they're not going to ask you again unless one of those charities they're also connected to. So that's the first way that we lose things. Say no by being honest and polite. The second way we can lose things is by asking why. And this is really important, you know, for meetings, for instance, we'll be on default, we just accept, just say yes, right? But ask, why am I the most important person to be there? Why is this meeting happening in the first place? What does success look like? What do I need to contribute? What actions do you think I'll have afterwards? Because if someone can't explain to you why they need you there and what they want you to contribute, and then what you might do afterwards, then you probably don't need to be there. You can politely decline. You can use the honest and polite strategy again, right? And what I encourage people to do is actually role model this first. So whenever you are asking of someone's time and energy, let them know why. Let them know what you expect of them, you know, so that you give them everything they need to make an informed decision. Because if you can't do that, then why are you having the meeting in the first place? So I say go first on this thing. And then the third way we lose things is we delegate. And what's really important about delegation in this context is to understand that just because something's depleting to you doesn't mean it's depleting to other people. And so here you might swap things, right? So they enjoy doing something that you don't enjoy doing, and vice versa. So swap it. It doesn't have to be about your job description, right? So just ways to do that. So three simple ways to lose stuff: say no, ask why, and delegate, right? Think of small acts of courage.
And you can do that in a and then you can do that in a like a work context and a family context as well. They're equally applicable, so you can delegate. Just thinking about some of our household tasks and some of those things. So it's about kind of really working together to get the job done. But ultimately, things in that bottom left, this is lose it. So these are the things that are taking our energy and not adding the value. Okay.
Totally. And then if we move to the next one, so something's energizing, but it's unimportant, right? So these are things that you'll still enjoy, but often these things are just can be distractions. And so what I say with these is I say put them and keep those in your back pocket, right? So if something's energizing and unimportant, keep it in your back pocket. You want to be conscious that actually if you give that too much, it can be distracting from other things. This box is also what I call, like, it's the adult fun corner, right? We as adults, we all know that sometimes there's joy in making bad decisions. This is where I say, like, tequila lives here, right? You know, so it's fun to do these things at the time, but you don't want to do them all the time because it's going to actually negatively impact you potentially. It's also things like mindlessly sort of binging on Netflix and stuff like that. Or it could be, say, in a work context, you might have a colleague, for instance, that you really get along with, but they don't make any decisions, right? Or they don't buy anything, say if it's a client, right? And so you can spend a whole lot of energy and time with this person and not really move forward or progress. And so it's just being aware of those. But what's important about back pocket is these are things that we can keep to help us as little boosts of energy when we need them. And I'll talk about how we do that in a second. The next box is the most important one, right? So energizing and important. Right? Like we talked before about our brains being hardwired for the negative. So often we focus a lot on the negative and we don't spend a lot of time really focusing here on the positive stuff that's energizing and important to us. And this box is really the key to that X factor conversation, taking control of my career. So when you put something in this box, and so for this box, you know, if you think about it, this is what we want more of, right? We want to increase the things that are in our diary that are energizing and important, because imagine opening up your diary and 80% of what's in there is, like you said, stuff I'm looking forward to because it's energizing and important. And this is where we can get to. Like, we don't get this overnight, obviously, but we can move towards that by practicing this more often. And so what I say to people, when you put something in this box, be very, very specific about why you did that, right? Get almost forensic on it. Ask yourself, why did I put it there, right? Was it because of what I was working on? Is it who I was working with? Is it the impact I'm making on someone else? Is it the fact that I'm just really good at that? And so I know that other people in my team appreciate my strengths. And then also think about the context in which you felt that way. So if you were on fire, you know, in a brainstorm, you know, and just like bam, 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 connecting the dots, or you read the room really well, you know, got the result that you wanted, you know, was it because you got a good night's sleep the night before, or went for a run so your brain was lit up, right? So how do we recreate that? Because once you've listed all those things down, you've literally got a recipe to ask for more, right? To create more and create more space for that. And so we really encourage people, yeah, just get really forensic on why you do that. And then from a career perspective, that means that once you're aware of that, you can ask for more of it, because you will also be creating a lot of value when you do these, because you're into it, you know, you're using your strengths, you're having an impact, you know, so this is really the key to taking charge of your career as well.
So what's left? The bottom,
yeah,
the bottom right box. What goes in there?
Should we move to the hard one? Right. So, so if something's depleting, but it's important, right? Depleting but important. This box is what we call energy vampires, right? So these are the things that can suck the life out of us. Most people, as soon as they say energy vampire, they start thinking about certain people. You know, that's very normal to think as well. But the important thing here is, like, if you identify, and this is what I mean about taking responsibility, if you identify that something is depleting but important, and you choose not to change anything, then you're actually choosing to continue to let that thing be an energy vampire, to let it suck the life out of you, right? That's your decision. You're responsible for that. But if you do want to change it, the key to this, to change it, is to reframe it. You know, and you talked about how you did that with your to-do list, right?
Okay, cool.
So need to reframe it. So let's talk about this energy vampires in two ways. So we'll start with tasks, right? So if we want to manage an energy vampire task, something that's important but depleting, right, we need to reframe that. We need to change it in some way. So a way that you might do it is almost what you sort of did with your label of your to-do list, right? Change the language. Often with these things, we'll say, I have to do that. But if I change it to say, I get to do that, straight away it feels different.
Subtle difference,
I get to do that. Yeah, because you also then start to make it not about you often, right? So it might be like you know, if I get to do my expenses and my timesheets, because that helps Karen from finance, and I like Karen, she's great, right? Helps her do her job, and then she pays me. Yes, right? So things like that, where we're just going, okay, if I get to, I can reframe that language. Another way that we might do is we might bookend things. I'm a big fan of bookending, right? So put something energizing before energizing afterwards, right? So it might be that, say, one of your back pocket things is a little reward. So once I finish this, I'm going to let myself watch that next episode of whatever it is that you're addicted to at the time.
Sure, that's good.
Right? So you're putting
like
that forward, yeah? And it doesn't mean that you have to have, you know, a huge amount of time each side, but just little things that are going to energize you. And what I say is, don't stack your day with back-to-back energy vampires, because then you go home and you practice what we call winefulness instead of mindfulness, right? So you might need you know, a couple of glasses,
I like that.
or a bottle, perhaps, depending on how to cope with that day, right? So really understanding that you're making the decisions about what you let into your diary. So don't do stack them back to back. Now, the other thing you can do too is, if there's a group of you doing the same type of admin type task, do it together, make it social, right? Because that will change the dynamic straight away. Now, if an energy vampire is a person, this is the thing that we need to understand, right? If someone said to you that you were an energy vampire, you would be horrified, right? No one wants to be seen as an energy vampire. And that's an important thing to understand, is that if we label someone an energy vampire, what we're literally saying is that person woke up that morning to suck the life out of you, right? And that's, you're probably not that important to them, right? And so understanding that, we know it's not about you. And so the way that we deal with energy vampires that are people is a two-step process. First of all, it's taking responsibility, right? Because it's a relationship. You've contributed to that dynamic in some way. So you've got to change something. The second thing is we need to practice empathy, right? Because it's not about you. They don't want to be seen as an energy vampire. They would be horrified to know that there's something else going on. So we need to understand that person and change how we interact with them. And it's not about practicing empathy to the nth degree. At some point, if you try a few different things and nothing changes, you're either going to have to bookend them, right? Or you're going to have to find a way to decrease the importance of that relationship, even if it's just in your head. And so this little tool, honestly, I promise you, like if you put everything in it, everything that we've talked about today is in that increase box, right? All of these things are going to increase our energy, whether it's sleep or whether it's doing work we're proud of, right? These are things that we want to be putting in there. And if you do this literally 10 minutes a week to focus the week ahead, you'll be amazed how much really starts to change.
Cool. We're out of time, sadly, because I think that we could talk about this for another 3 hours. But listen, thank you so much for that. I mean, I've taken a load of notes myself. So that framework that you provided is a really good way to look at our own lives and all the tasks and all the people in our lives. And then, of course, you start to take ownership, you start to take responsibility, and you start to choose. But you're choosing it consciously rather than thinking that you have to. But I love that point around just changing the language instead of using those words. I have to do it. I get to do it. Subtle difference, but huge difference in energy. But listen, where can people find out more? Where can they take the tests that you mentioned? Because I'm sure people are going to be really keen to dig a bit deeper into something which is so important.
Great. So if you just head to our website, go to ENERGX. So it's EnergyX, but no Y in it. So just
no Y. Okay.
.com.au. You'll find there's a free masterclass on there as well. If people want to do that, they can take the free energy assessment. When you do the free energy assessment, what it actually does, it'll take you to a whole bunch of content for you to actually explore in terms of practices to increase your energy as well. And that's all completely free.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sean, and thank you everyone for tuning in. And do go to Sean's website at energyx.com.au. So remember, it's energy without the Y. And thank you, Sean, for spending time with us. And we'll see you next time. And enjoy the rest of the festival, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lawrence.